Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, 5 p.m. and as usual, this is time for What Comes Next Live. My guest this week, coming from just across the Severn Crossing in Wales, is Neil Lavis. Neil and I met, did some work together around his role as head of prisons, I may get the title wrong, in the Cayman Islands, where he was for a number of years. Neil made a significant impression on me as a leader at a pretty challenging time, not just for prisons, but for the series of agencies within the ministry that he was part of. I've kept in touch with Neil over the years, even bumped into him at a Cayman Islands event at the Foreign Office in London a few years ago. He's got a number of different irons in the fire. And as always, I just would love to hear his thoughts. And one of the purposes of the show is to give people the inside of conversations. So it's nice to have a Cayman connection on the show. I feel I could do more of that. I've got some more Cayman guests invited on. Welcome, Neil. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Really good. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay. So the floor is yours. Where would you like to go?
Well, I suppose a bit of history might be good to see where I am. I was born many years ago in Bristol we had a little council flat. My mum was a nurse, my dad a plumber, and went through school really at that time in the 60s, and when I was leaving school in the 70s. There wasn't the people. With the people that I hung around with, the people that I socialized with, you didn't go to university. You got yourself an apprenticeship. You went straight from straight from school to work, and brought some money back into the house. And that's what I did. And I did that. I was a fabricator welder. I did 5-year apprenticeship in past that. And I remember one day, a guy was retiring. He was 65, and they presented him, and he'd done welding all his life, and he looked about, I have to say, he looked about 85. And I looked at him and thought to myself, is this as good as it's going to be? In years to come, when I eventually get to that age, if I do, of a hard work, like it was hard work. Is this where I'm going to be? And I think that was a time when I thought I need to do something different. It was at that time as well, a lot of redundancies were going on, industry was changing. And a friend of mine said he was joining the prison service, and why didn't I have a go? So back in 1982, I joined the prison service at Bristol Prison. And I've spent all my career doing that. And it was one of the, there's a lot of things said about the prison system, but I think it has moved forward and things have changed significantly. And it's been a brilliant career for me. And during that time, I've educated myself. I got myself a degree through the Open University, and also sort of honed people skills. And whizzing through now, I've semi-retired. I reached from officer. I went all the way through the grades, finally finishing off as governing. I governed in Swansea Prison, and then I was director of prisons in the Cayman Islands for 4.5 years, and then came back. I governed again at Lay Hill Open Prison until I went part-time back in 2020 July. Mm-hmm. Couldn't continue governing, and I thought I didn't want to waste my spare time. And I looked back on what I enjoyed doing. I thought I've got a perfect opportunity now to do something that I really want to do, that I got an interest in. And I thought to myself, what gives me passion? If I could strip everything down in the prison service and all the things that I did in that, what were my most enjoyable times? And believe it or not, it was walking around the prisons, talking to prisoners and staff, and getting to know them, listening to their life stories, and doing what I could to help them and move forward. And so I thought about coaching, and now I've been using some of that experience to try to move forward and start my own business. I've got a few clients who I work with, who are yes, it's surprising when you work with someone when you get feedback, the positive feedback of how that conversation for an hour, hour and a half, what that has made to them. And I suppose that's the buzz that I used to get when dealing with prisoners, residents, and also staff. So that's where I am now, really, and trying and balancing the two things. I still am involved with the prison service, but mostly that's to do with re-employment of prisoners on release.
So you clearly don't look 85, but did you age out of being a governor or something?
Well, yeah, because you cannot part-time manage a prison. It has to be a full-time role. So they were looking at maybe back-to-back, but really, if you're the leader, you're the person, you set your stamp, you set your values on the prison where you work, and to work with someone else, you'd have to be very close with that person and have the same sort of ideas, the way you feel things should move forward.
It feels like a really interesting, as you said, in that case, when you're the governor, you set your values, set your stamp. But the piece you were talking about, helping people move forward, that's what then you really enjoyed. The balance strikes me as a friend in Cayman and a longtime client, Morgan DaCosta. He used to talk about managing by walking around, which is quite a common phrase.
Yeah.
And then at one point, he used to walk around a lot. He would walk around the business, talk to the staff, but he'd also go on the road around Cayman and talk to his customers because he worked in distribution to retail.
Yeah.
So he talks to his customers all the time, and anybody who knows Morgan in Cayman, a lot of people do know he's very, very friendly, very warm. But he suddenly one morning I went in to talk to him and he went, you know what? I'm not managing by walking around anymore. I'm coaching by walking around.
Yeah.
And for him, it wasn't absolute, but he moved the balance from telling people what to do to listening to them first, and then supporting them around achieving what they needed and what the organization needed. Yeah. It's quite a subtle shift. You know? Yeah.
And so for me, leadership it can be broken down into three main things. One's about having the passion, do what you do, setting out your values and setting out what is important to you. And that can be small things. That can be, how you manage your day, how you interact with others, and getting that so people get to know you. The second biggest thing, and I think management by walking about or coaching by walking about does that, is building those big relationships with staff, building and again with the prisoners. I always used to take time to talk to people, to find out about them. I know there's some really successful managers who I won't name. One of them asks his managers to know whether or not they've got a partner, if they've got children, what their favorite sport is. He actually sets it out for them. But I really think that it doesn't have to be that prescriptive. It's about being interested in listening, like you said, to what that person's got to say, listening to their story and their ideas. When I started at Lay Hill, I walked around and said to staff and prisoners, if you were the governor, what would you change? What would you do differently? And that can formulate your strategy. That can formulate a big chunk of the way to move forward, because you then built that relationship that you will get buy-in and they will feel valued. And then the final part is about, delivering what you need to do and delivering that strategy. But if you've got people with you, you can, with big relationships, you can ask, big requests. You can say, listen, we need to get this done. And they feel involved. And when I went to Cayman, because I had a very short period of time, the first strategy I did was based around a report that had been done by Her Majesty's inspectors when they went there. And one of my biggest regrets is I didn't have time to speak and involve the staff as much as I wanted to, because we had a very short turnaround timescale. And it was really me saying, we need to do this, 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 and this. We need this policy, we need that. So there was a feeling of it being done to them.
Yeah.
And I think that was difficult. The second strategy that I did after the the return report, which was, I think, it was better. We'd moved along and that was clearly identified. I think that was more then about taking them away and talking to them and getting their ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From my own experience, both in leadership and coaching leaders, everything you're saying is absolutely bang on. I think for me, if I narrow it down to something really critical, it's being interested.
Yeah.
When you're in a position, I don't have any direct experience of the prison service other than asking you questions from time to time because I'm interested. But the nearest thing I can think of is something that is really military. I have some army background in my younger years. And you absolutely are an authority figure. If you're a governor or a senior officer, they have to do what you tell them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there can be surface listening. You mentioned somebody you knew is in management who would have a list of questions they asked.
Yes.
All right. And that, it's not about the list of questions or no list of questions, but for me, it's just being interested.
Yeah.
There's something very powerful in being interested in the other person. And then from that, it's a lot easier, like it's a kind of a Caribbean phrase. It's easier to pull a rope.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you get resistance from all of your staff, all of your officers on the floor, all of your prisoners, and when you look to create any kind of change, I would imagine they're so used to routine that if you wanted to change the meal time by 10 minutes and they weren't on side, it could cause enormous pushback because they have a ton of time. It's a bit like the area I live in, there's a lot of retired people, right? And I live on a housing estate. All right. So and with a management company for several hundred homes. And so there's a lot of people with so much time on their hands. The tiniest thing happens, they will put a lot of time into it.
Yeah.
So, if a tree grows too much in the summer, it's like it becomes the end of the world because they need something to fill their time, and you can get that. Yeah. But imagine if you're the management company and you, instead of just having the response of quite common response, quite understandable of, let me just do my job and not ruffle feathers and just do the minimum that happens because they only pay a couple $100 a year. If instead you actually engage people and go, we have this incredible woodland around us, right? And we want to win an award for the best managed estate within 5 years. And so that's what we want to do. What do you think? This is what we're thinking. And they go, and if the majority of people agree to that, and they go, so what do you think we could do, as you put it, what would you change? What would you do differently?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then if they turn around and they realize, like we've had in the UK, we've had, the southern part of England I'm in, we've had almost tropical growth patterns in June and July.
Yeah.
Just because the weather was unusually cool and wet for longer than usual. And now it's warmed up. It's like it's a jungle out there. Yeah. So then if you get the tree blocking your view more than usual, you go, oh, but it's part of a common thing that we're all doing. And so then you don't get 100 phone calls going, can you fight the tree preservation order? I want to chop this tree down so I can get a view or whatever. So I think the common thing is just being interested in people. Yeah. And when I met you, I just could sense that sometimes you would have more time than others to talk to people.
Yeah.
Other times, sometimes you'd have to get stuff done quickly. Other times you'd have to move on to the next meeting. But there was never a sense that you were anything other than very interested in everybody you talked to. Yeah.
I mean, it's different with Army in that there is that command and control part of it. And there are times in the service where you have, they say about a blue and a red leadership style, and you move between the two. One is command and control. One is when you're in an instant and you have somebody, on the roof or somebody in a cell with a hostage, or that's command. There is no room for debate. You take a voice around and then you make the call and people do exactly what they should do, exactly at the right time to bring the situation to a close. But very much that's that's few and far between, thank goodness. There is the other side of things, which is very much listening to others, bringing others in, very much conversational. And when you sit around the table and you say, well, what are your views? And it's about flowing between those two. And I think, although there are army and there are prisons, I think good leadership is good leadership. You know, the command and control, a lot of the time in the service, people will do stuff because there's that rank structure. But good leaders don't need that. I think in general day-to-day running of a prison, if you're good, then you don't need that. You need to be interested, listening, building good relationships, and people will then come with you. Rather than saying, I think there's a thing called grudging compliance and willing compliance. I think when you're in a command and control situation, sometimes if you just use that all the time, it's grudging compliance. You want to get to willing compliance, or even further down in that. Willing compliance seems even a little bit, you know, telling them what to do.
There's a guy that I'm looking to get on as a future guest, and I'm going to send him the show link after we've done it, who I met through a community last year, obviously not in person, the way things are going, called Ben Ford, and he used to be in the Royal Marine Commander, right?
Oh, right.
So, and I've followed him on Twitter quite a lot. I've been interested in what he talks about, but it can get very, very detailed in terms of organizational structure. And he talks about that. He talks about into coding and things like this. However, he started to put it in graphic form, which works really well for me because I can just visualize it. I'm quite a visual person. And one of the things he talks about is the thing, I'm going to link into command and control. There's a concept called the OODA loop,
right?
Which is the 4 letters OODA, and it's how fighter pilots make decisions. It's what you would use when you need to simply act quickly. All right, it's observe, orient, decide, act.
Right.
And then it's a loop. You just do it again. Then observe what happened, orient, decide, act.
Yes.
I think in the army we used to just call it ready, fire, aim sometimes. Okay. Depending on how fast you have to act. It's not the same thing at all, to be fair. I'm just making a joke. But he did a graphic a while ago which was really interesting. I'm not going to get it right. But it speaks to something about command and control. Because another future guest on the show is a guy called Dave Stewart, who works in leadership retreats outdoors in Scotland predominantly. He's got a business called the Fresh Air Leadership Company, and he's coming on in a few weeks. And Dave's ex-Special Forces, put it that way. The thing we never talk about the name of, but it's kind of near where you are in Wales.
Yes.
And he and I had quite a brisk dialogue about command and control, because I used a very rough language around command and control being dead. Well, I'm really meaning in business, it needs to be much more about the other style. Yeah. But there is always a place for it. But what Ben talked about was really felt to me, and he may think of it differently, somewhere in between. Obviously, in a crisis, hostage, man on a roof, Iranian embassy siege, both old enough to remember that. You have to act. Right, there's no time for messing around, and everybody needs to follow orders and play their part and just do it. But actually, there's a level at which the leader provides direction and creates a frame within which you can operate. So I'd imagine whether it's a business or the prison service, when you've got your team around you, it can be language like staff or team, or when you've got your team around you, and you would have managers, however the ranks are considered, but you'd have managers who would then have junior and line staff in different levels. Once they know what you're looking to achieve, and they have some parameters of how they need to achieve it, then to a large extent, I think a trick with moving from management to leadership for me is the point at which you start going, they might not do it my way. Right. But as long as they achieve the goal, they're going to feel empowered. And by the way, they might actually do it better than me by coming up with something new. But as long as they don't do anything that, say, puts the prisoners in danger or themselves in danger, and as long as they're moving towards the goals, there's something about, even within this sort of ex-military framework of OODA, that Ben was really talking about. Yes, there is a place for senior ranks setting the tone. Yes. But it's not dictating everything down to how you tie your shoes.
Absolutely. And that's about setting out your store. I really think, when that first, I would usually get to a new establishment and walk around for a while and just talk generally. But that first staff meeting set the tone. That used to set the tone about what I was around, what I would accept, what I felt but it was a general thing. It was around language. It was around behaviors. It was around my values. And so very broad brushstrokes. But then I would also, say, I think these are some of the areas where I think we need to look at. And when I went to Leyhill, it was around, a release on temporary license. It was around timeliness of doing certain boards in that for people, for parole boards and things like that. And there was a real issue with that. And that came across very strong on my first few weeks. And I then said, it's about treating people fairly, with respect. And to do that, we need to make sure we're timely with things like that. It's then over to this, like you say, you then say to the staff, how can we do this better? What can we do? What would improve it? What could you do? And it's funny, I think sometimes if you tell people what to do, they get quite defensive, as if you're criticizing them. When you say, listen, we know that there are things that we could maybe tweak and change. What do you want to do? How can I help you? They then come back with ideas and say, if we do this, and if you then follow that and it works, you get a great euphoria amongst the staff that they've achieved something,
When I'm listening and I'm looking to unpick a question that occurred to me, but I held it, was, what are your values? Because you mentioned several times that you'd be talking about that.
Yeah.
Then when you went on, you just modeled something pretty strong. So you talked about that assignment being at an open prison. So understanding that just a little, those people can be released on license, right?
Yeah.
So, but then there's some paperwork and review has to be done, probably by an independent board or something.
Yeah.
So one of your, if you will, commercial metrics was being able to get the right number of people at the right speed out on license.
Yes.
There was a systematic hold up in it. The timing wasn't good. And what I heard you say was that you first of all outlined that we treat people fairly and with respect. Yeah. So that's a values piece.
Yes.
And then you've told them the outcome you're moving towards. Yeah. So in a way, there's in quotes, command and control piece around that. This is where the direction we travel.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to behave. This
is
the values of which we're going to apply.
Yeah.
And then there's an investigation of how we're doing it, and then what can we do to improve it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when I went to Cayman, there was a very proud staff there. They just had a really poor report, which had bruised them. Yeah. So it was about lifting them up and saying, right, they are quite big on certain values. So I introduced DICE, decency, integrity, commitment, excellence. So those were the things, 4 things. If you have too much of a values system or a statement, you lose them. If you do it in pages, but I just said decency, treating people decently, integrity, being honest, having integrity, being committed, and then we will achieve excellence. And those were the 4 things, very simply. And when you walk around and spoke to staff, after a while, they would quote that. They would just something in their head that when they're on a one-to-one with each other or with a prisoner, that's the values they should model. And I think that as a leader, that's my role. And then steer it, rather than, like you say, go and say, right, we need to do, I could have said, right, I need to make sure that we do this in this time and it's that one, and you need to move there. I don't think as a lead, that's moving. I think there's operator, manager, leader. And I think if you're an operator or a manager, that's your detail. When you move, and I think it is a jump to a leader, you take that step back and guide more. And that's you. And when you do it, sometimes you do it without thinking, but then when you look back, you thought, well, that worked. So what did I do? And I think I've been lucky enough to be able to reflect on that.
I love it. And I'm really glad that we've having this conversation, because I will point multiple people towards watching it later or listening to it later, because it's a great live example. And it's also, for me, for sure, and I'm sure for many others, they might not look at the governor of a prison as somebody who thinks of leadership this way. And you may or may not be an exception in the prison service. But, you've just said something which is, you could, be going to Harvard to do an MBA in organizational leadership and they wouldn't necessarily say any better than you just did. You know, what you really said was you just gave 4 values to them.
Yeah.
I said, remember those.
Yeah.
And I've worked with some really large companies and organizations, and never ever allow them more than 3 or 4 values.
Yeah.
And then one of the bits which I would imagine you've always done is you then say, so in what way in the Cayman Islands prison, for example, where you were not familiar with it, what does decency and integrity, commitment and excellence look like here? What does it look like to you? Because then they can own it. They can go, well, excellence, I make a very Caribbean joke. Excellence is starting to shift on time. Right? That's in some cultures, that's like everybody's always on time. One of the fascinating things about Zoom, if somebody on a group Zoom is 2 minutes late, everybody's waiting for them. Right? Even in a regimented system, or whether it's a company or prison service or anything like this, in certain cultures, including the UK, being 2 minutes late is okay. Being 5 minutes late, people start wondering.
Yeah.
But then you have certain cultures, some Hispanic cultures, mañana, soon come in the Caribbean. And so, I always made a point of being bang on time for every meeting in Cayman.
Yeah.
Right? Because most people typically were 5 or 10 minutes late all the time.
Yeah.
And never apologized.
Yeah. And that was one of the things, again, when I first went there, the morning meeting started at 9 o'clock. And if they were late, then it's, and sometimes I would make sure it's quite a quick meeting. So when they were arriving, we were walking out, and sending that message that that's not acceptable. I really think, and my meetings I try to keep my meetings maximum 2 hours, between 1 and 2 hours, nothing longer. Because I think if you go longer than 2 hours, people will make excuses not to be there. So there are certain little quips that I have that people go, even now, if people said, what Neil Lavis meetings in Lay Hill or wherever I've done it, they'll go, oh, they won't go on much over an hour, because he will drive the bit, he will do the business. If it needs another meeting, then we'll do that. Yeah. But we're not going to sit there talking around things for 2 hours or plus.
Yeah, and yes, you need structure to that. I think I will highlight one thing for Cayman viewers or listeners later. It is a cultural thing, that the differences of lateness and different levels of acceptance. But what would be very different is if you said, right, you all need to do this, blah, 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 blah. Now, when I was 19, I took a summer job delivering timber in Edinburgh. And the stand-up meeting at the beginning of the day is who do what, always started at 8 o'clock, which is really early if you're 19 years old, right? And you have to get the bus across town to get there, to drive your lorry. You were fined £1 for every minute you were late.
Wow.
And I was being paid about £2 an hour back then.
Wow.
Right. But that was when you're 18, 19, you need a shock to the system.
Yes.
Right? But you can give a shock to the system. But the other thing you can do is you go, we have 4 values here: decency, integrity, commitment, and excellence. And we start off easy. If by being committed and to excellence, we'll be on time for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it just reframes it. It also gives them the responsibility rather than fining them £1 for every minute. It's like,
I would also, we had a conversation around, is the meeting time okay? Is it too early for people? Could we do it? Because there was no reason for it. It was, it needed to be done reasonably early. But if it had to be moved back 20 minutes or half an hour to fit people's needs, then fine. We would do that. So there were conversations around it as well. It wasn't just me saying this is how it is. But it is about.
That's very decent of you, Neil.
Well, there we are. I think it is about. That's part of my values. I am on time, and that was one of the values that I think. And if somebody needed to have their meal on time, then you need to make sure that's there and ready. People need to go on exercise. People need to go. Whatever. It's about setting that structure. Yeah. Particularly with some of the prisoners, they'd never had structure in their life. They'd live a chaotic lifestyle. So, putting that in to say, listen, you need to get up and go to work at a certain time, gave them that structure. And that's across, when I was in Cayman and right across to present day.
I love it. And one of the things, I'm doing a culture project with a US-UK company right now. So 8 p.m. UK time, I've got an hour-and-a-half meeting because I find 90 minutes is the ideal time. But with a group. And one of the things we're talking about is when you look at your purpose and your focal points and your values, they will be ones that you share with everybody you work with, your customers, your suppliers, the people you contract with, and because they're part of your assets. So I absolutely am sure, I'm just saying it out loud for people, is that you would have told the prisoners those values too. Right? So this is how this prison will operate.
Yes.
And we will treat you this way with decency, integrity, and we'll be committed to being excellent. We also expect you to treat the staff with decency and and the more you commit to being part of the way we're setting this up, the better you're going to be treated, kind of thing.
And part of that commitment is also sitting with them and saying, building them up, that, some of them have had really difficult times and I've got no self-belief, nothing. I never had a well done, or you've done a great job with that. Remember time and time again, people come up and saying to me, well, I know I'm a bit stupid, but, and that would, when they start off their lives like that, I destroy just sort of grief. What do you think of yourself? We need to build that up. We need to give you a feeling of excellence, a feeling that you are somebody and you have a role to play. I mean, that takes time, but I think good leadership does that. You do that with your staff, you make them feel, that they are valuable.
We are fiercely agreeing with each other. And one of the working on values is something I've done a lot. One of the other pieces is to work out somebody's intent, their purpose in life. And I can sense from you telling your early life story or your early working life story, and then what you just said about the prisoners, right, that yours will not be, whether you've articulated it, got it down to a few words or not, it will not be far different from mine, which there's a phrase that the two most important days in someone's life are the day they're born and the day they find out why. And I worked with a coach and mentor for quite some time to unpick everything in my early 40s and some time ago. And mine is making potential possible. And the real depth of learning in that is for others and self.
Yes.
So I would imagine your deep purpose is something not too dissimilar from that.
Yes.
Because you just kind of you're interested in people and you want to help them, support them get better. So I'm jealous of your clients.
Well, there's also the flip side as well. I think there's also about holding people account as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that I always say when people are ready to change, that's when you need to be there to help them. Yeah. And if they're not ready, and like you say, if their intent when they come into an organization, whatever organization is, to not to improve, not to make an effort, I think a good leader will find that and then hold people to account and let those people go if they're not have the same values and feelings as you do. I think that's an important part as well.
Totally. And I'm fascinated to, you and I have had multiple conversations, but not one like this.
No. And
it's fascinating. You've had 40 years now, nearly.
40 years next year.
And I was doing my arithmetic, and but 40 years in a very, very different industry sector, shall we say. I find that everything you're saying could be applied anywhere. Is really just speaks to something I put in the sort of the header of this conversation, the page, which is that leadership's about people, end of story.
Yeah.
You could be running a prison, you could be, doing anything at all. And it's the same stuff, because the commonality is that every business has people in it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So conscious we run a bit over time.
Okay.
I want to honor your evening, and we will go and suffer in the heat till it cools off.
Yes, okay.
It's mini heat wave.
Yeah.
So it's been wonderful, Neil, and very, very inspirational and educational for me. I do like to let people have the last word. So what closing thoughts have you got?
I must admit, when I start off these conversations, you start off slowly, but I get a real passion, and sometimes I have to hold myself back because I really believe that, and for me, if I can give people success now, because I'm at a stage in my career where I'm not going to go I don't want to go anywhere. I'm quite happy. I'm part-time. When I coach people, I say to them, if you can succeed, then that will be, a great feeling for me. So, I love doing this. I love doing this. I love my job, but I love doing this. So, yeah, really, I'm just here to try and help others to succeed, really.
Cool. That's fantastic. And where can people find you?
Sorry? It's on Neil at Lavis Leadership Coaching. So Lavis Leadership Coaching. I've got a web page, and I'm also on LinkedIn as well. If people need to look on LinkedIn, so that'd be great.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you very much, Neil. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much. Okay.